A man who had it all, a thriving business, a mansion in the suburbs, 2 beautiful children and a devoted wife of 15 years. From the outside, Julian Croft's life was the American dream. But behind the closed doors of their multi-million-dollar home, a nightmare was brewing. Fueled by a secret affair and a monstrous ego, he made an unthinkable choice. When his wife Clara discovered the truth, he didn't beg for forgiveness. He answered with his fists. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a brutal betrayal and the shocking court verdict that dismantled an empire and took everything from a man who believed he was untouchable. The scent of freshly cut grass and chlorine hung in the humid afternoon air of the manicured suburb of Westport, Connecticut. From the expansive kitchen window of her colonial-style mansion, Clara Croft watched her 2 children, 12-year-old Lily and 9-year-old Sam, their laughter echoing as they splashed in the cerulean blue of the in-ground pool. Everything in the frame looked perfect, like a page torn from a luxury lifestyle magazine. The pristine white siding of the house, the meticulously landscaped gardens, the high-end stainless steel appliances that reflected her strained face. It was a beautiful picture, but the canvas was beginning to fray at the edges. Her husband, Julian Croft, was the artist behind this masterpiece of a life. A charismatic and ruthlessly ambitious real estate developer, he had built his empire Croft Holdings from the ground up. He was the man everyone admired at the country club, the one who gave the most at charity auctions, the one whose confident baritone could command any room. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. To Clara, for 15 years, he had been her everything. She had met him in college. She was studying architecture, her mind buzzing with designs and blueprints. He was in business school, his eyes already set on a future of skyscrapers and lucrative deals. He'd swept her off her feet with his grand promises and unwavering ambition. "You and me, Clara," he'd whispered to her on their 3rd date. "We're going to build an empire." And they did. But while he built his with steel and glass, she built hers within the walls of their home. She'd set aside her own career aspirations to raise their children, to host his business partners, to be the silent, supportive architect of his personal life, so he could conquer the professional one. For a long time, it was enough. But over the last year, a subtle chill had crept into their gilded cage. Julian, who once came home eager to share the day's victories, now returned late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unfamiliar perfume he always blamed on a client or a colleague. He'd stare at his phone, a slight secretive smile playing on his lips, and quickly angle it away if she walked into the room. His compliments, once warm and genuine, now felt rehearsed and hollow. The distance between them in their king-sized bed had grown into a vast, cold canyon. "Another late one tonight, honey," he'd said that morning, not even looking up from his phone as he straightened his Tom Ford tie. "Closing the big Sinclair deal. It's a monster." The Sinclair deal. He'd been talking about it for months, and he'd been talking about Amber Sinclair for just as long. "My new VP of acquisitions," he'd introduced her at the company's Christmas gala. Amber was everything Clara wasn't anymore. She was in her late 20s, sharp-hungry, with a sleek blonde bob and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. She looked at Julian not with the comfortable love of a wife, but with the raw, undisguised admiration of a disciple or something more. Clara had felt a prickle of unease that night, a feeling she had quickly buried under layers of denial. It was just business. Julian was a handsome, powerful man. Of course, younger women would admire him. But the late nights became more frequent. The business trips on weekends where he was suddenly unreachable for hours began to pile up. A charge on the credit card statement for a boutique hotel in the city which he'd dismissed as an accidental booking for a client. A pair of delicate diamond earrings in his briefcase that he claimed were a gift for his mother, though Clara never saw her wear them. Each discovery was a small cut, a tiny tear in the fabric of her reality. She tried to confront him once, her voice trembling as she held up the hotel receipt. Julian had simply laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Clara, darling, you're being hysterical. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? The Sinclair deal is worth over $50 million. I was winning and dining investors. Do you want this life? Do you want the house, the cars, the schools for the kids? Then let me do my job." He'd turned the tables so masterfully, making her feel small, paranoid and ungrateful. She had retreated, ashamed of her suspicions. Tonight, however, was different. It was their 16th wedding anniversary. She had reminded him that morning. He'd blinked a flicker of something annoyance, forgetfulness in his eyes, before his charming mask slipped back into place. "Of course, darling. I'll be home by 7. I'll make a reservation at Per Se." It was now 9:30 p.m. The reservation had long since passed. The children were asleep. A single-place setting remained at the polished mahogany dining table beside a bottle of champagne sweating in a silver bucket. Clara sat in the silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out each second of her humiliation. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her friend, Maria. "Thinking of you on your anniversary. Hope Julian is spoiling you, rotten XOXO." Clara's fingers trembled as she typed a reply. Before she could, another message came through. It was an alert from the joint credit card account. American Express. A charge of $785.42 has been approved at the Gilded Lily restaurant. The Gilded Lily, a notoriously romantic, intimate restaurant in the city. A place for lovers. It wasn't Per Se, and it was a charge made just 15 minutes ago. He wasn't stuck in a late meeting. He was out dining with someone else on their anniversary. The cold dread that had been a subtle undercurrent for months now flooded her, a tidal wave of ice. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about proof. The denial she had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. He wasn't just distant. He was living a separate life, a life she was funding but was not invited to. As she stared at the notification on her phone, the name he'd mentioned that morning echoed in her mind. The Sinclair deal. Amber Sinclair. A sudden fierce resolve hardened her features. She would not sit here and wait for him to come home smelling of lies. She stood up, her movements stiff. She walked to his home office, a room she rarely entered. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she needed something tangible. A receipt, a note. Anything to prove she wasn't going insane. His laptop was open on his desk. She stared at it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was a violation of his privacy, an act of mistrust. But trust, she realized with a bitter pang, had already left the building. She touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. It was unlocked, and open on the screen was his personal email. The top message in the inbox made her breath catch in her throat. From Amber Sinclair. Subject: Tonight. Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Jay, forget the old ball and chain. The future is us. See you at our spot. All my love. A. The words blurred through her tears. Old ball and chain. That's what she was. A relic. An obstacle. The foundation upon which he built his empire now just a nuisance to be forgotten. The confirmation didn't bring relief, only a profound, soul-crushing agony. The picture-perfect life was a lie. The gilded cage was a prison. And the man she loved was a stranger. The drive into Manhattan was a blur of streetlights and tears. Clara didn't have a plan. She was operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, and a pain so sharp it felt physical. The text message, the email. They were a 1-2 punch that had knocked the wind out of her, leaving her gasping for a truth she could no longer ignore. Every traffic light seemed to mock her a glaring red symbol of the stop she should have put to her doubts months ago. She found the Gilded Lily nestled on a quiet, cobblestoned street in Soho. It was exactly as she'd imagined, discreet, elegant, with soft lighting that spilled onto the pavement, creating an aura of intimate secrets. She parked across the street, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was she going to do, Storm, in Make a Scene? The thought was terrifying, so contrary to her nature. She was Clara Croft, the poised wife, the calm mother. She didn't cause public disturbances, but the woman sitting in the driver's seat of the Lexus SUV was no longer just Clara Croft. She was a woman betrayed, a woman whose entire world had been built on a foundation of lies. She watched the entrance for what felt like an eternity, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. And then she saw them. Julian emerged first, laughing, his arm draped possessively around Amber Sinclair's shoulders. Amber leaned into him, her blonde head resting on his chest for a moment, her face alight with a triumphant glow. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that clung to her body, a stark contrast to the conservative navy dress Clara wore. They looked like a power couple, radiant and untouchable. They looked like they belonged together. The sight was a dagger to Clara's heart, twisting with a brutal finality. He hailed a taxi. As he opened the door for Amber, he leaned in and kissed her a deep, passionate kiss under the soft glow of the street lamp. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a lover's kiss full of intimacy and promise. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship, a whole other life he was living without her. She followed the taxi, her mind a maelstrom of rage and grief. Her thoughts raced. Were they going back to his office, to a hotel? The taxi didn't head for the highway back to Westport. Instead, it pulled up in front of a sleek, modern apartment building in Tribeca, one she didn't recognize. She watched as Julian paid the driver, and they disappeared inside his arm, still firmly around Amber's waist. Clara sat in her car for a long time. The silence of the vehicle, a stark contrast to the screaming in her head. She knew with a sickening certainty that this was their place. The monster deal wasn't just business. It was the construction of a new life with a new woman. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was replacing her. The drive home was slow and deliberate. The tears were gone, replaced by an icy resolve. The hurt was still there, a gaping wound in her chest, but it was now surrounded by a cold, hard anger. When she walked back into the silent, cavernous house, it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, a set for a play in which she had been unknowingly playing the fool. Julian arrived home just after 2 a.m. He tried to be quiet, but the heavy front door clicked shut with a definitive thud. Clara was waiting for him in the dimly lit living room, sitting in one of the oversized armchairs. She hadn't changed. The single glass of untouched champagne still sat on the table beside her. He froze when he saw her, the charming mask momentarily slipping. "Clara, you're still up." "Happy anniversary, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his practiced apology already forming on his lips. "Honey, I am so sorry. The Sinclair deal, it went into extra innings. We had to wine and dine the Japanese investors. They're notoriously difficult. I completely lost track of time. My phone died. I feel terrible." The lies were so effortless, so smooth. A year ago, she would have believed him. She would have felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. Now she just felt pity. Pity for him and for the fool she had been. She stood up slowly. "The Gilded Lily," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Is that where the Japanese investors like to dine?" Julian's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his handsome features looking suddenly gaunt under the dim light. What? What are you talking about?" The credit card alert, Julian, for $785. At a table for two, I presume. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "And the apartment in Tribeca, is that where you hold your late-night business meetings? 2. He was cornered. For the first time in their marriage, she saw genuine panic in his eyes. His bluster deflated, replaced by a desperate scramble for a new lie. "Clara, you're not making any sense. You must be mistaken. You've been under a lot of stress." "Don't you dare!" she whispered, her voice trembling with repressed fury. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me again. I saw you, Julian. I saw you and Amber." The mention of Amber's name changed everything. The panic in his eyes hardened into something else, something cold and cruel. His posture shifted from defensive to aggressive. The mask was off. "So what if you did?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a low growl. "What were you doing, following me, spying on me?" "You're pathetic." The insult struck her, but she held her ground. "I am your wife. We have a family. We have a life. Or at least I thought we did." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "A life? This isn't a life, Clara. It's a performance. You, the perfect housewife in her perfect mansion. Me, the provider. It's been a bore for years." He took a step towards her, his presence suddenly menacing. "Amber. Amber understands me. She's smart. She's ambitious. She sees me for who I am, not just as a walking checkbook." Each word was a deliberate cruelty, designed to wound. He was dismantling their 15 years together, piece by piece, right in front of her. "I gave up my career for you," she said, her voice breaking. "I built this home. I raised your children. And you've been well compensated for it." He shot back, his eyes glinting with malice. "Don't pretend you're a martyr. You love this house, you love money, you just don't want to share it." The argument escalated, their voices rising in the cavernous room. It was a torrent of every unspoken resentment, every buried frustration from the past few years. Clara accused him of betrayal, of lies, of disrespect. He in turn painted her as a clinging, ungrateful, paranoid woman who was holding him back. He was rewriting their entire history, casting himself as the victim, the man trapped in a gilded cage with a boring wife. Then Clara said the words that would prove to be the final, irrevocable turning point. "I want you to leave," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Or I will. I'll take the children, and I will leave. We're done, Julian." His face contorted with rage. "You'll do nothing," he seethed. "This is my house. These are my children. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. They're my children too, and I will not have them raised by a liar and a cheat." That was when he lunged. But it was what he said next, his voice, a venomous hiss that would haunt her forever. "Amber was right. You're a leech. You need to be taught a lesson." The mention of Amber's name was the spark that ignited the inferno. It was one thing for Julian to be cruel, but to use his mistress's words as a weapon against his wife in their home, it was a desecration. It confirmed for Clara that this wasn't just Julian's decision. It was a shared cruelty, a verdict they had passed on her together. She said that... Clara's voice was barely a whisper, the fight draining out of her replaced by a hollow shock. Julian's face was a mask of pure fury. He saw her shock not as a sign of pain, but as a weakness to be exploited. "She sees you for what you are, Clara. A dead weight I've been dragging around for years. She told me I needed to cut you loose, and she was right." He was closing the space between them now, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the room. Clara instinctively took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. This was a side of Julian she had never seen. The charming veneer had been stripped away, revealing something ugly and violent beneath. "Get out, Julian." She repeated, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a primal mix of fear and defiance. "I mean it. Get out of this house now." "This is my house," he roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Everything you have is because of me." He was inches from her now, his finger jabbing at her chest. "You are not going to ruin my life because you're feeling a little insecure." "My insecurity?" she cried, shoving his hand away. "You're the one living a double life. You're the one destroying this family for a cheap affair." The moment the words "cheap affair" left her lips, something snapped in his eyes. His face, which had been red with anger, turned deathly pale. His rage became something colder, more focused. "Don't you dare talk about her that way," he hissed. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. The strength in his grip was terrifying. Clara cried out, a mix of surprise and pain. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." "You want to know what hurt is?" He snarled, his face contorted. "Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman who hasn't had an original thought in a decade. Hurt is having to pretend to care about PTA meetings and garden parties while my life is passing me by." He shoved her backward. Clara stumbled, her heel catching on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. She fell hard, her head cracking against the sharp corner of the marble coffee table. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. For a moment, the world went black. Stars bursting in her vision. Dazed, she lay on the floor, the room spinning around her. She could taste blood in her mouth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him standing over her. She expected to hear concern, maybe even panic at what he'd done. Instead, what she heard chilled her to the bone. "See," he said, his voice laced with a terrifying calm. "This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." He wasn't sorry. He was justifying it. Clara pushed herself up onto her elbows, her vision slowly clearing. Her head throbbed with a nauseating rhythm. She touched her fingers to the back of her head, and they came away wet and sticky with blood. The sight of it, dark red against her pale skin, jolted her out of her daze. He had hurt her. He had physically, violently hurt her. For his mistress. "You hit me." She breathed the words, heavy with disbelief. "You fell," he corrected coldly. "You were hysterical, and you tripped. That's what happened. That's the story." He was already creating the narrative, the next in a long line of lies. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was her adversary. He was a threat. The thought of her children asleep upstairs, oblivious to the monster their father had become, sent a jolt of pure protective terror through her. She had to get them out. She had to get them away from him. Scrambling to her feet, ignoring the dizzying pain in her head, she made a run for the grand staircase. "Stay away from me. Stay away from us." He was faster. He caught her at the base of the stairs, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her back with such force that she screamed. The pain was sharp and searing. "You are not going anywhere," he bellowed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. "You're not taking my children. You're not taking my money. You will stay here, and you will play the part of the loving wife, or I swear to God, Clara, I will make your life a living hell." It was in that moment, with his hand twisted in her hair and his eyes filled with a hatred she never thought possible, that the love she once had for him died completely. It wasn't a slow fade. It was an instantaneous, violent death extinguished by his brutality. In its place, something new was born, a steely, unyielding resolve. With a surge of adrenaline she didn't know she possessed, she drove her elbow back into his gut. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched herself free, stumbling up the first few stairs. He lunged for her again, but this time she was ready. She turned and kicked out her heel, connecting squarely with his chest. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was enough to make him stagger backward. "Don't touch me again," she said, her voice low and shaking with a fury she'd never felt before. He stared at her, breathing heavily, more surprised than hurt. He saw the look in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by something he didn't recognize. Something that wasn't going to break. He straightened his shirt, his composure slowly returning. A cruel, calculating smirk spread across his face. "Fine," he said smoothly. "Have it your way. But you're making a very, very big mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He turned and walked calmly to the front door. "I'll be at the club," he said over his shoulder. "When you've had time to cool down and see reason, we can talk. But this conversation is over." The door clicked shut, leaving Clara alone in the echoing silence of the foyer. She stood trembling on the stairs, her hand flying to her throbbing head, her scalp aching where he had pulled her hair. The magnificent house, her gilded cage, now felt like a crime scene. She looked at her reflection in the large, ornate mirror on the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. A thin trickle of blood ran from her hairline, down her temple. She saw the bruises already beginning to form on her arms where he'd grabbed her. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a victim, and she had the evidence to prove it. Ignoring the pain, she walked on unsteady legs to the kitchen, grabbed a handful of ice, and wrapped it in a dish towel, pressing it to her head. Then she walked back to the living room and took out her phone. Her first instinct was to call the police, but Julian's parting threat echoed in her ears. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He was powerful. He had connections. He would twist the story. He'd already told her what the story would be. She was hysterical. She fell. No. She needed a different kind of help. She took several clear, unflinching photos of her injuries, the cut on her head, the angry red marks on her arms, the developing bruise on her cheekbone where her face had hit the table. She time-stamped them. Then she scrolled through her contacts, her finger hovering over a name she hadn't needed in years, but one she had kept for a reason she never wanted to admit to herself. Her college friend, Eleanor Vance. Now one of the most feared and respected divorce attorneys in the state of New York. She pressed the call button. when Eleanor's sleepy voice answered Clara's broke.
"Ellie,"
She sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking.
"it's Clara. I need your help. Julian. He hurt me."
The next few hours were a blur of calculated, terrified action. On Eleanor's stark instructions over the phone, Clara did not wash the blood from her hair. She did not change her clothes. "Go to the emergency room in Stamford, not Westport," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through Clara's panic. "Tell them exactly what happened. Use the word assaulted. Get a full medical report. Then pack a go-bag for you and the children. Only essentials. Passports, birth certificates, a few changes of clothes. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Do not go back to the house." Waking Lily and Sam was the hardest part. She gently shook them awake, her heart aching at their sleepy, confused faces.
"We're going on a little adventure, sweethearts,"
she whispered, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. She helped them pack their favorite toys and books into their backpacks, her movements frantic but quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She expected Julian to walk back through the door at any moment. By 4 a.m., they were gone. Clara drove away from the mansion that had been her entire world for 15 years, not even daring to look at it in the rear-view mirror. The trip to the ER was humiliating. The nurses were kind, but the questions were clinical and sharp. The doctor documented every bruise, every cut, his expression grim. They gave her a pamphlet on domestic violence shelters. It all felt surreal, like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. Eleanor Vance's office was a sleek, minimalist space in a downtown skyscraper, a world away from the chintz and comfort of Westport. Eleanor, or Ellie, as Clara had known her, was no longer the free-spirited art history major from college. She was a woman clad in a steel-grey power suit, her gaze intense, her presence formidable. She hugged Clara tightly, then immediately switched into professional mode. "Okay, Clara, let's get to work," she said, leading her to a conference room. "The medical report is crucial. Your photos are excellent. We filed for an emergency protective order this morning. He will be legally barred from the house and from contacting you or the children." Julian was served the papers at his office that afternoon. The explosion was immediate. Clara's phone, which she had been advised by Eleanor to keep on but not answer, lit up with a furious barrage of calls and texts. "Julian, what the hell is this? Are you insane? Julian, you can't keep me from my own children. I will destroy you for this, Clara. Julian, call me back now. You are making the biggest mistake of your life." Then came the calls from his lawyer, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Marcus Thorne. He left a chillingly polite voicemail for Eleanor, which she played for Clara on speakerphone. "Ms. Vance," Thorne's smooth voice began, "my client, Mr. Croft, is deeply concerned for his wife's mental stability. He informs me she had a hysterical episode last night, tripped and hit her head. Her accusations are slanderous and are clearly a ploy for a larger settlement in a divorce she seems intent on pursuing. We are prepared to fight this with every resource at our disposal." "He's already spinning it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Of course he is," Eleanor said calmly, her eyes like chips of flint. "This is what men like Julian Croft do. They control the narrative. Our job is to take that control away from him, and we do that with facts, not emotion." The first battle began immediately. Julian, through his lawyer, filed a motion to have the protective order thrown out, submitting affidavits from friends and business partners attesting to his gentle nature and Clara's recent emotional volatility. Simultaneously, he cut her off financially. Every joint credit card was declined. The debit card for their shared account was frozen. Suddenly, Clara, a woman who had never had to look at a price tag, couldn't even buy her children a happy meal. Eleanor had anticipated this. She had a fund set aside for clients in exactly this situation. She put Clara and the children up in a secure extended-stay hotel and gave her a prepaid credit card for immediate expenses. "He thinks he can starve you out," Eleanor explained, her expression grim. "He wants you desperate and crawling back to him, willing to accept whatever scraps he throws your way. We are going to show him how badly he has underestimated you." The next 2 weeks were a grueling introduction to Clara's new reality. Life was a series of meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and child psychologists. The children were confused and scared. Lily was old enough to sense the tension and asked difficult questions Clara struggled to answer. Sam had started having nightmares. The secure but sterile hotel suite felt a world away from their sprawling home and backyard. Julian, meanwhile, launched a campaign of psychological warfare. He used their mutual friends to get messages to her, painting himself as the heartbroken husband worried about his unstable wife. He sent lavish gifts for the children to the hotel, along with notes saying how much their daddy missed them, a move Eleanor identified as a clear attempt to manipulate the kids and guilt-trip Clara. But Julian's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He believed he was invincible, that his money and influence made him untouchable. He refused every settlement offer Eleanor put on the table, convinced he could crush Clara in court. "He wants to go to war, Ellie," Clara said one evening, exhausted after another 10-hour day of depositions. "He wants to humiliate me." "Let him," Eleanor replied with a thin smile. "Arrogant men make mistakes, and while he's busy trying to prove you're an unfit mother, my team is doing a deep dive into something he values more than his children, his money." The forensic accounting team Eleanor had hired was led by a quiet, meticulous man named David Brown. He spent weeks combing through thousands of pages of financial documents from Croft Holdings. At first, everything seemed to be in order. Julian's company was on the surface a massive success, valued at over $100 million. But David Brown was looking for the things Julian didn't want anyone to see. He cross-referenced LLCs, followed money into offshore accounts, and analyzed investment patterns. One evening, he called Eleanor with a tremor of excitement in his voice. "I think I've found something," he said. "It's a series of wire transfers, very cleverly hidden. Large sums of money moving from Croft Holdings into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The name of the corporation is AS Enterprises." "A.S.," Eleanor repeated slowly. "Amber Sinclair." "That's what I thought," David confirmed. "It looks like he's been systematically siphoning millions of dollars out of the marital asset pool and hiding it. But it gets worse. I've been looking at the projections for his latest development, the big Sinclair deal he's so proud of. The numbers are creative. He's leveraged the company to the hilt to fund this thing. He's counting on a massive payday. But if anything goes wrong, a shift in the market, a delay in construction, the whole house of cards could come crashing down." Eleanor hung up the phone, a predatory gleam in her eye. Julian wasn't just a cheater and an abuser. He was a fraud. He was trying to hide assets from his wife while simultaneously gambling the entire family's fortune on a risky venture, likely at the urging of his new partner. "Clara," Eleanor said, turning to her client. "We need to talk. I think we just found the key to dismantling Julian Croft's entire empire." The first battle had been about survival. The next one would be about justice. The discovery of AS Enterprises shifted the entire landscape of the case. It was no longer just a contentious divorce. It was a potential case of large-scale financial fraud. Eleanor Vance knew that in a high-stakes divorce, the person who controls the financial narrative often wins. Julian had tried to paint Clara as a gold digger, but Eleanor was about to paint him as a thief. The forensic accountant, David Brown, delved deeper. He worked tirelessly, his team tracing the flow of money like digital bloodhounds. They discovered that AS Enterprises wasn't just a holding company. It had made significant investments. It had purchased a multi-million-dollar apartment in Tribeca, the one Clara had seen them enter, and a portfolio of luxury goods, a new Porsche expensive jewelry designer clothes. All of it paid for with money funneled from Croft Holdings money that was legally half Clara's. He wasn't just having an affair, Eleanor explained to a stunned Clara. He was building a new life for Amber with your money. He was systematically liquidating your shared future to fund his. The betrayal cut deeper than Clara could have imagined. It wasn't just infidelity. It was calculated, cold-blooded theft. While she was managing their home and raising their children, he had been meticulously stealing from them. But David Brown found something even more damning. Julian's monster Sinclair deal was a ticking time bomb. He had secured massive loans based on inflated property value projections and fraudulent occupancy commitments. It was a classic developer's gamble, but on a colossal scale. He had essentially mortgaged the entire company on this one project. He's in a precarious position, David summarized. He needs this project to succeed, or he's facing total financial ruin and possibly even criminal charges for bank fraud. He is desperate. This desperation explained his aggression, his refusal to settle. He couldn't afford to give Clara a fair share of the company, because in reality the company's value was a fiction. He needed every penny to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Eleanor knew they needed more than just financial records. They needed a human element, someone from the inside. "Who did he fire recently?" Eleanor asked Clara one afternoon. "Think back over the last year. Any senior people let go suddenly?" Clara thought for a moment. "There was Robert Aiken," she recalled. "He was the chief financial officer for almost a decade, a very by-the-book, cautious man. Julian replaced him about 8 months ago. He said Robert was too conservative for the company's new aggressive growth phase. He promoted someone younger." "Who did he promote?" Eleanor asked, her pen poised over her legal pad. "I think his name was Greg Milner. Julian liked him because he was a yes man." Eleanor's team immediately went to work trying to find Robert Aiken. They located him in Florida, where he'd taken an early retirement. At first, he was reluctant to speak, bound by a non-disclosure agreement and a hefty severance package. But Eleanor was persuasive. She explained that she wasn't interested in his breach of the NDA, but in potential criminal fraud he might have been pressured to overlook it. She flew down to meet him in person. Over coffee, in a quiet Tampa cafe, Robert Aiken, a man with a tired face and honest eyes, finally opened up. "Julian Croft is a brilliant salesman." Robert began stirring his coffee. "He can sell sand in the desert. But his ethics, they became flexible. It all started when Amber Sinclair came on board. She was ambitious and she fed his ego. She convinced him he was a visionary, that traditional risk assessment was for lesser men." Robert detailed how Amber and Julian had cooked up the Sinclair deal. He had warned Julian repeatedly that the financial models were reckless, that they were misleading investors and the banks. "I told him it was fraud, plain and simple." Robert said, his voice low. "I refused to sign off on the loan documents, so he offered me a generous package to retire and replaced me with Greg Milner, who would sign anything Julian put in front of him. I took the money because I have a family to support, and I knew Julian would ruin my reputation if I went public. He would have painted me as a disgruntled employee. Robert Aiken was their star witness. He could testify to the company's true financial state and Julian's fraudulent activities. He even had copies of his original undoctored financial models for the Sinclair project, which he had saved on a personal hard drive as an insurance policy. While the financial case was building, Eleanor didn't neglect the domestic abuse charge. Julian's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was working hard to discredit Clara, preparing to argue that her injuries were self-inflicted in a desperate grab for money. "They will try to tear you apart on the stand, Clara," Eleanor warned her. "They will bring up every argument you ever had, every time you were emotional. They will try to paint you as unstable." Clara felt a knot of fear in her stomach. "But he assaulted me. I have the medical report." "And they will say you are a liar. It will be your word against his. Julian Croft, the beloved community leader, versus the hysterical housewife. In court, it's about what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt." Clara's face fell. It seemed so unfair. Just as despair began to set in, she remembered something. It was a small detail, something she hadn't thought was important. "The living room," she said slowly. "A few months ago, Julian installed a new smart home. You know, voice-activated controls for the lights, music, security. He loved showing it off." Eleanor sat bolt upright. "What's the brand name of the system?" Clara told her. Eleanor immediately got on the phone with a tech expert. "These devices," the expert explained, "they're always listening for a wake word, but they also store short, temporary audio buffers, and sometimes during a significant auditory event like a loud crash or a scream, the device can be triggered to save a recording to the cloud." The chance was slim, but it was a chance. Eleanor's team drafted a subpoena for the tech company, demanding any and all audio files recorded in the Croft residence on the night of the assault. Julian's lawyers fought it ferociously, citing privacy concerns, but the judge, intrigued by the possibility, granted the request. Weeks went by. The trial date loomed. Clara was a nervous wreck preparing for the character assassination she knew was coming. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor called her. "We got it, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice tight with excitement. "The company sent the file. It's 37 seconds long. I'm sending it to you now. Brace yourself." Clara's hands trembled as she opened the email and downloaded the audio file. She put her phone to her ear and pressed play. The quality was slightly muffled, but it was undeniably clear. It began with the sound of her own voice, strained and high-pitched, destroying this family for a cheap affair. Then Julian's voice, low and menacing. "Don't you dare talk about her that way." There was the sound of a scuffle, her own pained cry. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." And then his voice dripping with venom. "You want to know what hurt is? Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage." The recording continued, capturing the sickening thud of her head, hitting the table, followed by a moment of silence. And then Julian's chilling, damning words. "See, this is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." It was all there. His rage, his violence, and most importantly, his own admission, his justification of the act. He hadn't said, "Did you fall?" He had said, "This is what happens when you push me." It was proof, irrefutable, undeniable proof. Clara sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of relief. Julian Croft, the master of the narrative, had no idea that his own beloved gadget had been recording the truth. His own arrogance had once again become his greatest enemy. The courtroom was Julian Croft's new stage, and he played the part of the wronged husband to perfection. Dressed in a somber, bespoke suit, he sat beside his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. He cast sorrowful glances toward Clara, a performance for the judge who would decide his fate. Across the aisle, Clara sat beside Eleanor Vance, a silent statue of resolve, her hands clasped to still their trembling. The trial began with a brutal, calculated assault on Clara's character. Marcus Thorne, a master of courtroom theatre, called witnesses who painted Clara as emotional and erratic. He twisted her fear of Julian's affair into a narrative of obsession and paranoia. When Clara took the stand, Thorne's cross-examination was a masterclass in insinuation. "Mrs. Croft," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Isn't it true you were terrified of losing the luxurious lifestyle your husband provided? Isn't it true that when you discovered he had a new successful colleague, you became hysterical and followed him fabricating this story of abuse to secure a larger settlement?" Through it all, Clara held her ground, her voice steady. "I was terrified of the man who was lying to me and hurting me," she stated, simply refusing to let Thorne rattle her, but she could feel the doubt he was planting in the air. Soon it was Julian's turn to testify. He strode to the witness box with an air of confidence, flashing a reassuring smile at the judge. He recounted his version of their anniversary night with polished ease. "Clara was hysterical," he said, his voice laced with regret. "She was making wild accusations. She lost her footing and tragically she fell. It was a terrible accident. I would never ever lay a hand on my wife." Eleanor Vance began her cross-examination, her questions like surgical incisions. She first dismantled his financial empire. She produced the wire transfers to AS Enterprises, the shell company named for Amber Sinclair. "Mr. Croft, you used this company to funnel over $4 million of marital assets to purchase an apartment and a Porsche for your mistress, did you not?" Julian sputtered, his composure cracking. "It's a legitimate corporate entity." Then Eleanor called Robert Aiken, the former CFO. Aiken calmly and methodically exposed the truth of Croft Holdings. He testified that the company was leveraged to the hilt, propped up by fraudulent loan applications for the Sinclair deal, a project he called a catastrophe waiting to happen. Julian's face turned ashen as the image of his untouchable empire was revealed to be a house of cards. But Eleanor saved her final devastating blow for the assault itself. "Your Honor," she announced, "the plaintiff would like to introduce one final piece of evidence." A court officer placed a speaker on the table. Julian watched a knot of confusion and fear tightening in his chest. "Mr. Croft," Eleanor said, her voice sharp, "you testified under oath that your wife's injury was an accident, that she fell. Is that correct?" "That is the absolute truth," Julian declared, his voice a shade too loud. "Then perhaps you can explain this," Eleanor said, and pressed play. The courtroom fell silent, filled only by the tinny audio from the smart home device. First came Clara's voice, "Destroying this family for a cheap affair." Then Julian's menacing reply, the sounds of a scuffle, and Clara's pained cry. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was locked on Julian Croft as his face contorted in a mask of pure horror. He looked like a man watching his own execution. A sickening thud echoed from the speaker, followed by a collective gasp from the gallery. And finally Julian's own voice, clear as day, dripping with cold justification. "See? This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus Thorne dropped his head into his hands. Julian stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake, his mouth agape. He had been exposed not by a witness, but by his own voice, his own words, his own monstrous truth. Eleanor let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "Mr. Croft," she said quietly but with immense power, "this is what happens when you push me. Those are not the words of a man witnessing an accident. They are the words of an abuser." The verdict delivered 2 days later was an annihilation. Judge Miller, looking down from the bench, found Julian Croft guilty of assault. She referred him to the district attorney's office for perjury. The protective order was made permanent. On the division of assets, the judgment was even more ruinous. Citing Julian's egregious financial misconduct in attempting to hide millions with his mistress, the judge awarded Clara 100% of the value of those stolen funds. The apartment, the car, the jewelry. It was all hers. She was then awarded 70% of the remaining marital assets, which, thanks to Robert Aiken's testimony, was now understood to be 70% of a bankrupt, debt-ridden company. Clara was granted sole legal and physical custody of their children. Julian was permitted supervised visitation twice a month, but only after completing a year-long batterer's intervention program. His child support and alimony payments were based on his former 9-figure income, a crippling sum he now had no way to earn. As a final indignity, the judge awarded Clara exclusive use of the Westport mansion, giving Julian 48 hours to remove his personal belongings under court supervision. As the verdict was read, Julian sat frozen. The color drained from his face. His amour, his reputation, his family, all gone. In the gallery, he saw Amber Sinclair slip out of the door, abandoning the sinking ship, without a backward glance. He had lost everything for a woman who was now running from the wreckage. The aftermath was a swift and total collapse. Croft Holdings filed for bankruptcy. The media savaged him. He became a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs he could no longer afford. Clara, guided by Eleanor, made no attempt to salvage Julian's toxic legacy. She sold the cavernous mansion and its haunting memories. She sold the Tribeca apartment and the Porsche. After her legal fees were paid, she was left with a comfortable but modest nest egg. She bought a smaller, light-filled house in a new town, a place with no ghosts. She enrolled Lily and Sam in the local school and started taking architecture classes again, rediscovering the part of herself she had sacrificed for Julian. Her life was no longer one of extreme luxury, but it was filled with peace and purpose. It was real. A year later, while gardening in her new backyard, she received a postcard from Florida. It was from Robert Aiken. "Clara," it read, "what you did took incredible courage. Thank you." She held the note to her chest and smiled. The gilded cage had been demolished. She had lost a fortune, but in exchange, she had won back her freedom, her future, and herself. She was no longer Julian Croft's wife. She was just Clara, and for the first time in a very long time, she was truly home. Clara's story is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. It's a chilling reminder that the most polished facades can hide the darkest secrets. Julian Croft believed his money and power made him invincible, but he forgot that character is the one asset you can't buy, and the easiest one to lose. He beat his wife for his mistress, and in the end, the scales of justice didn't just balance, they tipped so far, they crushed the very foundations of his world. This story is about more than just a verdict. It's about the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the courage it takes to walk away from a beautiful lie to build a true life. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe in the power of justice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. What part of Clara's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. The sound that broke Cressida Bishop's life wasn't a scream, but the delicate shatter of a champagne flute on marble. It was her husband's gala, a celebration of his fashion empire, and she stood frozen 5 months pregnant, watching him kiss another woman under the glare of a crystal chandelier. The woman was his new star designer, but it wasn't the kiss that shattered her. It was his words when he finally saw her. He didn't look guilty, just annoyed. "Darling." He sighed, a whisper of pure venom. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just business. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." Her world didn't just crack. It atomized. That was the night she walked out with nothing but a broken heart and a life growing inside her, completely unaware that the key to his entire kingdom was already in her hands. Life in the Montclair penthouse was an exercise in curated perfection, from the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a living masterpiece to the stark white orchids that were replaced every 3 days. Everything was designed to be beautiful, flawless and untouchable. Cressida, or Cress as she preferred, often felt like just another one of those exquisite, fragile objects. Her husband, Lucius Montclair, was the architect of this world. He was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Montclair Couture, an empire built on the dazzling, cutthroat world of high fashion. To the public, he was a visionary. To his board, a titan. To Cress, he was the man who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of ambition and charm, who saw her a young, promising textile designer and decided she would be his. Their meeting had been a fairy tale. She was interning at a small artisanal fabric mill when he'd come scouting for new materials. He was captivated not by her designs, which he called charming but provincial, but by her quiet grace and the way she seemed to complement his own dazzling persona. He pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. Within 6 months, they were married. Cress, swept away by the grandeur and the intensity of his affection, believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She soon learned, however, that being Mrs. Montclair meant her own ambitions were expected to be packed away like last season's collection. Her design sketchbook, once filled with vibrant, innovative patterns, gathered dust on a shelf in her cavernous walk-in closet. When she tried to show him her work, he would pat her hand indulgently. "That's lovely, my dear," he'd say, his eyes already on his phone. "But you have a much more important role now. You're the face of my home, the hostess of my parties. Leave the hard work to me." The penthouse, for all its beauty, became her gilded cage. Her days were a structured sequence of appointments, with event planners, nutritionists, and personal trainers, all meticulously scheduled by Lucius's assistant. Her friends were Lucius's friends, wives of bankers and executives, who spoke of charity galas and summering in the Hamptons their conversations as sterile and polished as the marble floors beneath their feet. Cress felt a part of herself, the creative, passionate part, slowly suffocating. The news of her pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion, a fresh start. When she told Lucius, placing the positive test on his polished mahogany desk, he looked up from a quarterly report, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He simply nodded slowly. "Good," he said, as if she had just successfully closed a deal. "A son, I hope. An heir is good for the brand's image. Legacy." His reaction was a cold splash of water, but Cress tried to rationalize it. He was a busy man, always thinking about the business. She threw herself into the pregnancy, hoping the shared experience of creating a life would bridge the growing chasm between them. She started sketching again this time, designs for baby clothes using soft organic fabrics. She imagined a small independent line, something of her own. One evening, brimming with a rare surge of confidence, she laid out her sketches and business proposal on the dining room table before he got home. She had worked on it for weeks, researching suppliers, costing out materials, and even creating a brand name, Bishop's Weave, a nod to her family name and her grandfather who had been a tailor. Lucius walked in, loosening his tie, his face tight with the stress of the day. He glanced at the papers scattered across the table, and his lip curled into a faint sneer. "What's all this? It's my idea," Cress began, her voice trembling slightly. "A luxury baby clothing line. The market is strong, and I have a unique perspective on sustainable fabrics." He picked up a sketch of a tiny, hand-stitched romper. He held it for a moment before letting it drop back onto the table. "Cressida, we've discussed this. Your hobby is charming, but it's not a business. Montclair Couture deals in power and desire, not baby clothes. It would dilute the brand." "It wouldn't be part of Montclair Couture," she insisted, her heart sinking. "It would be mine, something I built." He laughed, then a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Built, darling, you have no idea what it takes to build something. You live in a world I built for you. Your job is to be here, to be beautiful, and soon to be a mother. That should be enough for you. Now let's clear this away. We have the Future of Fashion Gala tomorrow night, and I need you to look rested." The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't see her. He saw a function, a role to be played. The dismissal of her dream of her very identity beyond being his wife was more painful than any overt act of cruelty. As she gathered her sketches, her hands shaking, she felt the first true deep crack appear in the flawless facade of her life. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and for the first time, she was rattling the bars, wondering if she had the strength to break them. The gala, meant to be a celebration of his success, now loomed like a final judgment on her own life's failures. The Future of Fashion Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, and Lucius Montclair was its undisputed king. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters weaved through the throngs with trays of shimmering champagne, and the air hummed with the electric buzz of power money and influence. Cress felt a familiar sense of detachment as she stood by Lucius's side, a practiced smile fixed on her face. She wore a deep emerald gown of Montclair silk, a dress chosen for her, designed to perfectly accommodate her 5-month baby bump, while still exuding effortless elegance. To the outside world, she was the picture of a serene, glowing mother-to-be, the perfect consort to the man of the hour. Inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Lucius's dismissal of her business idea the night before had left a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of couture could cover. Lucius was in his element, holding court, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He accepted congratulations, his laughter booming his charisma, a tangible force field. But his eyes kept darting across the room, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place, anticipation, perhaps in their depths. Lucius, darling, a triumph as always, a gushing socialite, air-kissed them both. We do what we can, Brenda, Lucius replied with a practiced, self-deprecating charm. But the real future of this house is standing right over there. He gestured towards the stage, where a willowy woman with fire-red hair and a predatory smile was speaking to a cluster of fashion journalists. This was Giselle Dubois, Montclair Couture's new head designer, poached from a rival Parisian house with an astronomical salary. She was Lucius's latest, most celebrated acquisition, hailed as a design prodigy who would propel the brand into the stratosphere. Cress had met Giselle only once, a brief, chilly introduction, where the designer's eyes had swept over Cress with a look of utter disinterest, as if she were a piece of outdated furniture. Now, watching her command the room, Cress felt a prickle of unease. "I need to go speak with the press, darling," Lucius said, squeezing her arm. "Mingle. Look radiant." He left her side, and she felt instantly adrift. She made her way through the crowd, nodding and smiling, her mind a million miles away. She found a quiet alcove near a balcony, seeking a moment of respite. The cool night air was a relief. From her vantage point, she could see most of the ballroom. She saw Lucius make his way over to Giselle. He didn't join the press circle. Instead, he drew Giselle away towards a shadowed corridor behind a large floral arrangement. Cress's unease sharpened into a cold dread. She told herself she was being paranoid hormonal, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, she slipped out of the alcove and moved towards the corridor, keeping to the edges of the room. The thumping bass of the music masked her footsteps. As she neared the floral display, she could hear their voices low and intimate. "The collection is a masterpiece, but you, my dear, are the true work of art," Lucius was saying, his voice a low purr she hadn't heard him use with her in years. "And you are the patron who knows how to display it." Giselle's throaty laugh replied, "Is your lovely little incubator enjoying the party?" The casual cruelty of the word incubator struck Cress with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "She plays her part," Lucius said dismissively. "She's content. As long as she has her charities and her nesting instincts, she's perfectly manageable." Cress peeked through a gap in the orchids. She saw Lucius's hand slide from Giselle's waist to cup her face. He leaned in and kissed her, not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss, filled with a passion Cress had only ever dreamed of. Time seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. In that moment, Cress's world, already cracked, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the complete and utter negation of her existence. She was a part, a manageable incubator. Her love, her pregnancy, their life together, it was all a sham, a carefully managed piece of brand strategy. She stumbled back, knocking a waiter's tray. A single champagne flute teetered and then fell shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of her own heart. The sound made them both turn. Lucius's eyes widened not with guilt or remorse, but with pure, unadulterated annoyance. He strode out of the corridor, Giselle a smug shadow behind him. "Cressida," he said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes cold as ice. What are you doing, skulking in the corners?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "I saw you, Lucius." He glanced at the onlookers who were beginning to stare, his face hardening into a mask of public control. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her towards a side exit. "Don't you dare make a scene here," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "You will ruin everything." "You ruined everything." She finally choked out the words, raw and ragged. "Our marriage, our baby." They were in a deserted hallway now. He finally let her go, pushing her against the wall. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and she saw nothing but contempt. "Our baby," he scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a convenient distraction for you, isn't it? Something to keep you busy. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." The words from the opening hook, the final fatal blow. He had taken the one pure, precious thing in her life, their unborn child, and twisted it into another insult, another way to diminish her. Something inside Cress snapped. The grief, the shock, the years of quiet subservience, it all coalesced into a single clarifying moment of cold, hard certainty. She looked him dead in the eye, her tears suddenly gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I should focus, but not on the baby, on getting as far away from you as I possibly can." Before he could react, she turned and walked away. Not back to the party, but down the hall past the kitchens and out a service exit into the cold night air. The city lights blurred as she walked a taxi's headlights, cutting through the darkness. She didn't look back. She left behind the diamonds, the silk gown, the penthouse, the lies. She walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back, a life growing inside her, and the chilling echo of her husband's final unforgivable words. The shattering was complete. Now all that was left were the ruins. The cold night air hit Cress like a slap, a brutal awakening from the suffocating warmth of the gala. The emerald silk gown felt like a costume from another life, thin and useless against the city's unforgiving chill. Her manicured hands, accustomed to the soft leather of a chauffeured car, fumbled in her tiny clutch. She had her phone, a lipstick, and a single credit card, a supplementary card on Lucius's account, which she knew would be cancelled by morning. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She was pregnant alone and effectively homeless on a downtown street corner. The towering skyscrapers that once represented a life of luxury now seemed to mock her, their glittering facades cold and indifferent. For a terrifying moment, she had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and the friends she'd cultivated over the past few years were Lucius's allies, their loyalty bought and paid for by his influence. Then a memory surfaced, a beacon in the storm. Mrs. Peterson. Martha Peterson was her landlady from college, a kind, no-nonsense widow who rented out rooms in her modest but impeccably kept brownstone in a quiet, older part of the city. Cress had kept in touch, sending a Christmas card every year, a small link to a life that was truly her own. With trembling fingers, she found the number and called. "Cressida? Dear, is that you? It's past midnight. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Peterson's voice was warm but laced with concern. A sob escaped Cress's lips, the first sound she'd made since leaving the hotel. "No," she whispered the word, cracking. "Nothing is all right. Can I come over? I have nowhere else to go." There was no hesitation. "Of course, dear. The kettle's always on. Come home." Home. The word was a balm to her shattered soul. A taxi ride across the city felt like a journey across worlds. She left the sleek, modern steel and glass of Lucius's district and entered a neighborhood of brick buildings, fire escapes and laundromats that glowed warmly in the dark. Mrs. Peterson opened the door before Cress even knocked. She was a small, sturdy woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel wool. She took one look at Cress's tear-streaked face and the ridiculously opulent gown and simply opened her arms. Cress collapsed into her embrace, the raw, unfiltered grief she'd been suppressing, finally erupting in a storm of sobs. Mrs. Peterson led her inside, sat her down at the worn oak kitchen table, and wrapped a thick knitted afghan around her shoulders. She placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in Cress's hands and sat opposite her, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. Over the next hour, the whole sordid story came pouring out, the dismissiveness, the affair with Giselle, the final cruel words about the baby. Mrs. Peterson listened without judgment, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a quiet, simmering anger on Cress's behalf. "That man," she said, finally, her voice firm, "is a fool of the highest order. To throw away a diamond because he's too busy admiring cheap glass." That night, Cress slept in the small attic room she had rented as a student, the scent of lavender and old books a comforting lullaby. The mattress was lumpy. The sheets were faded cotton, not Egyptian, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. The next few weeks were a brutal adjustment. The first thing she did was take the taxi to a consignment shop and sell the emerald gown and the diamond earrings she was wearing. The money was a pittance compared to their worth, but it was hers. It was enough for a few weeks' rent to Mrs. Peterson, who initially refused, but relented when Cress insisted a simple wardrobe of second-hand clothes and groceries. The whiplash of her new reality was staggering. One day she was attending fittings for custom maternity wear. The next she was counting change to see if she could afford organic milk. The nausea of her first trimester returned with a vengeance amplified by stress and a diet that no longer included chef-prepared, nutrient-balanced meals. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. Some days the weight of her grief and fear was so heavy she could barely get out of bed. She would lie there, one hand on her growing belly, and weep for the future she had lost and for the child who would be born into this chaos. Lucius made no attempt to contact her. The credit card was cancelled within hours, as she'd predicted. A week later, a curt email from his lawyer arrived informing her that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that given the circumstances of her desertion, she should not expect a generous settlement. There was no mention of the baby. It was as if she and their child had been surgically excised from his life. The cold corporate cruelty of it all reignited a spark of anger within her. It was a small spark, but in the darkness of her despair, it was enough to see by. Mrs. Peterson was her rock. She would leave trays of toast and soup outside Cress's door, never pushing, but always present. She'd coax her out for walks in the local park, encouraging her to feel the sun on her face. "One foot in front of the other, dear," she'd say. "That's all anyone can do." Slowly, painfully, Cress began to piece herself back together. The storm was still raging, but she was no longer adrift. She was learning to build a raft. She started sketching again, not for a business, but for herself. She drew the faces she saw in the park, the intricate patterns of leaves on the sidewalk, the way the light hit the brick buildings at sunset. It was a way to reclaim a part of herself that Lucius had tried to extinguish. She was no longer Cressida Montclair, the millionaire's wife. She was Cress Bishop, a designer, a survivor, and a mother-to-be. And in the quiet anonymity of her new life that felt like a promotion, months bled into one another. The city transitioned from the crispness of late autumn to the deep freeze of winter. Cress's belly grew round and full, a constant living reminder of the new life she was now solely responsible for. The sharp, acute pain of Lucius's betrayal had dulled into a persistent heavy ache, but her focus had shifted. Her survival and the well-being of her baby became her entire world. She found a quiet rhythm in her life with Mrs. Peterson. She helped with chores around the house, her sketches began to fill a new portfolio, and she even took on some small freelance jobs designing logos and brochures for local businesses. The pay was meager, but the sense of accomplishment was immeasurable. Each dollar she earned was a brick in the foundation of her new independent life. One particularly cold and snowy afternoon, with the city hushed under a blanket of white, Mrs. Peterson asked for her help clearing out some old boxes from a storage closet. "My old bones aren't what they used to be," she said with a smile. Amongst the dusty relics of a life well lived, Cress found a small wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was hers. Her mother had sent it to Mrs. Peterson for safekeeping when Cress had first moved in with Lucius, filled with childhood mementos and things that didn't fit into the sterile minimalism of the penthouse. She had completely forgotten about it. Curious, she pried open the lid. Inside were photo albums, her old art school projects, and a collection of her grandfather's things. Robert Bishop had been a master tailor, a quiet, meticulous man who had passed away when Cress was in her late teens. He had been her first mentor, the one who taught her about the feel of different fabrics, the importance of a perfect stitch, the soul that could be woven into a garment. She lifted out his old sewing kit, the heavy shears he used to cut cloth, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was not jewelry, but a single ornate old-fashioned brass key and a thick sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. Her name, Cressida, was written on the front in her grandfather's elegant looping script. Her heart pounded as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was dated a week before he passed away. "My dearest Cressida, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope that you have found happiness in your life. I am writing to you about a part of my past I rarely spoke of. Long before I was a simple neighborhood tailor, I was a partner in a business. I was the craftsman, the artist. My partner was the salesman, the visionary. Together we founded a small but exceptional textile company called Ariadne Weavers. We created fabrics of unparalleled quality. Over time, my partner, a man named Jonathan Montclair, wanted to expand into fashion, into a world of glamour and branding that held little appeal for me. We had different visions. I wanted to create art. He wanted to build an empire. We parted ways amicably. I sold him my operational shares, but I kept my founding stake, a silent, controlling interest in the parent company we had established. I had no interest in boardrooms or stock markets, but I wanted to ensure the legacy of our quality was protected. I put these shares into a blind trust for you, my only grandchild. The company evolved, and Ariadne Weavers became the foundation of what you now likely know as Montclair Couture. Jonathan's son, and perhaps his grandson, may have forgotten that the roots of their grand empire lie in the hands of a quiet tailor. This key will open a safe deposit box at the Sterling National Bank downtown. Inside you will find the trust documents. They are structured to give you full control upon your 30th birthday, or under a force majeure clause, which can be enacted in the event of significant personal distress or upheaval. My lawyer, a brilliant man named David Chen, holds the second key and the full instructions. His card is enclosed. This is your legacy, Cressida. Not a weapon, but a shield. It is the fruit of my life's work. Use it to protect yourself, to build something beautiful and true, and to ensure that true craftsmanship is never sacrificed for the sake of empty glamour. Be happy, my dear girl. With all my love. Grandfather Robert Cress read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so violently the parchment rattled. Montclair Couture, Lucius's company. Her grandfather was the silent founder. It seemed impossible, a fantasy. She stared at the heavy brass key in her palm. It felt impossibly real. A shield, he had called it. Right now, she needed a shield more than anything. The next morning, driven by a dizzying mix of hope and disbelief, she called the number on the enclosed business card. A calm, professional voice answered. Law offices of Chen and Associates. My name is Cressida Bishop, she said, her own voice barely a whisper. I was told to contact a Mr. David Chen. It's regarding my grandfather, Robert Bishop. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Chen has been expecting your call for a very long time, the voice replied. Can you come in this afternoon? The law office was in a sleek, modern building, a world away from Mrs. Peterson's cozy brownstone. But Cress walked in not as a supplicant, but as a woman on a mission. David Chen was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He greeted her not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. He already had his key. Together they went to the bank. The safe deposit box was opened, and inside, nestled in a leather-bound folio, were the documents. As Mr. Chen explained the complex legal language, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her grandfather hadn't just left her some stock. He had left her a 52% controlling interest in the holding company that owned Montclair Couture and all its assets. It was an ironclad, unassailable majority stake. Because Lucius's father had diluted his own shares over the years to fund acquisitions and pay off debts, Lucius's own portion, which he believed gave him ultimate control, was only around 35%. He was a king ruling a kingdom he didn't actually own. Your grandfather's force majeure clause is quite clear. Mr. Chen explained, his voice calm and steady, as he looked at the heavily pregnant, determined woman before him. Your current circumstances, divorce, financial abandonment, more than satisfy the conditions. The trust is now yours to command. The question is, Ms. Bishop, what do you want to do with it? Cress looked down at the documents at her grandfather's name, entwined with the Montclairs. She thought of Lucius's sneering face, of Giselle's cruel nickname for her, of the way her dreams had been casually crushed. But more than that, she thought of her grandfather's words, build something beautiful and true. A slow, determined smile spread across her face. The storm hadn't broken her. It had washed away the debris and revealed the foundation that had been there all along. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice clear and strong, I want to call a meeting, an extraordinary general meeting of the shareholders, and I want to introduce them to their new majority owner. The discovery of her inheritance didn't trigger an immediate, vengeful charge. Instead, it ignited a slow, deliberate fire within Cress. The months of helplessness and fear were burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. She was no longer a victim adrift in a storm. She was the storm itself, gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to make landfall. David Chen became her general, her strategist. They met not in his gleaming corporate office, but in the quiet, sunlit parlor of Mrs. Peterson's brownstone, a war room hidden in plain sight. Over cups of tea and plates of biscuits, they pored over decades of company financials, board meeting minutes, and shareholder reports. Cress wasn't just claiming an inheritance. She was earning it. She devoured every document, learning the intricate dance of corporate governance, finance, and law. She discovered the company's weaknesses, its strengths, and most importantly, the rot that had set in under Lucius's leadership. While Montclair Couture's public image was stronger than ever, thanks to Giselle's flashy, critically acclaimed but astronomically expensive new collection, the company's finances told a different story. Lucius was leveraging assets to fund lavish marketing campaigns and his own exorbitant lifestyle. He had fired dozens of long-serving loyal employees, master tailors, pattern makers, and textile experts who had been with the company for decades, some since her grandfather's era, replacing them with cheaper, less experienced labor to cut costs. He was sacrificing the very soul of the company, its commitment to quality craftsmanship, for short-term buzz and profit. He was turning her grandfather's legacy into a hollow, gilded shell. "He's arrogant," David Chen observed one afternoon, tapping a finger on a damning quarterly report. "He believes he's untouchable. That's our greatest advantage. He won't see us coming." Their plan, which Cress privately named the Phoenix Agenda, was twofold. First, they needed to consolidate her power silently. While her 52% stake gave her control, David advised acquiring a few more percentage points on the open market through a proxy buyer. This would not only fortify her position, but also create a small stir, a tremor that might put Lucius on edge, but wouldn't reveal the true source of the earthquake to come. "We make him look for a threat from a rival corporation or a hedge fund," David explained. "He'll be looking in the wrong direction, scanning the horizon for battleships, while our submarine glides right underneath him." Second Cress needed to be ready. It wasn't enough to be the owner. She had to be the leader. She spent her days studying and her nights sketching. But now her designs weren't for a quaint baby line. They were for a new Montclair Couture, a collection that honored her grandfather's commitment to fabric and form, but was infused with a bold, modern vision. It was a vision of strength, resilience, and quiet power. Everything she herself was becoming. As her due date approached, her resolve only hardened. The kicks and flutters in her womb were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for, not just for herself, but for her child's future, a future free from the shadow of a man like Lucius Montclair. Meanwhile, Lucius remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware. Cress's quiet disappearance from his life was to him a problem solved. He was seen at every party, every opening with the triumphant Giselle Dubois on his arm. The press hailed them as the new power couple of fashion. In a widely circulated interview, Lucius was asked about his recent divorce. "Sometimes people grow in different directions," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "My focus has always been, and will always be, on the future of this company. I require a partner who shares that vision, not one who is distracted by domestic trivialities." The words relayed to Cress by David were like fuel on the fire. Domestic trivialities. He was talking about their child. A week before the annual shareholders' meeting, Cress gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her daughter in her arms in the quiet hospital room, looking into her tiny, perfect face, Cress knew every fear, every tear, every moment of struggle had been worth it. This was not just about taking back a company. It was about reclaiming her life and building a legacy of strength for her daughter. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived a cool, crisp morning 6 weeks after Grace was born. Lucius was expecting a routine victory lap. The press was already lauding his incredible turnaround of the brand. He had prepared a triumphant speech about record-breaking sales from Giselle's latest collection and his bold vision for the future. Cress, however, was preparing for battle. She left Grace in the loving care of Mrs. Peterson. She didn't dress in a flashy, attention-grabbing gown. Instead, she chose a custom-tailored suit of her own design, made from a deep charcoal grey wool that her grandfather would have admired. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional chignon, and her face, though tired from sleepless nights with a newborn, was set with a resolve of forged steel. As David Chen held the door of the car for her, outside the corporate tower that bore the Montclair name, he gave her a final reassuring nod. "Ready, Ms. Bishop?" She took a deep breath, the city air cool and clean. She thought of her grandfather's letter of her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was no longer the broken, weeping woman who had fled into the night. She was a phoenix, risen from the ashes, and she was about to claim her sky. "I'm ready," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and power that was entirely her own. The Montclair Couture boardroom was on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of power overlooking the sprawling city. It was designed to intimidate with a long, imposing table of polished black granite and chairs that resembled minimalist thrones. The shareholders and board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in expensive suits, were already assembled. At the head of the table sat Lucius Montclair, radiating an aura of absolute command. He was tanned, smiling the very picture of a man at the apex of his success. Beside him, in a seat of honor, usually reserved for the COO, was Giselle Dubois, looking smug and victorious in a shockingly red dress. She was not a board member, but her presence was a clear statement of her power and influence within Lucius's new world order. "As you can see from the preliminary reports," Lucius began, his voice smooth and confident, "Giselle's Metamorphosis collection has not only garnered universal acclaim, but has also driven sales up by 200% this quarter. Our stock price is at an all-time high. The future of Montclair Couture has never been brighter." He launched into a self-congratulatory speech filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and brand actualization. He painted a picture of a future built on his singular, brilliant vision. The board members nodded along their expressions, ranging from impressed to sycophantic. It was at that moment, just as Lucius was pausing for dramatic effect, that the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman they didn't recognize. She was flanked by the formidable David Chen, whose reputation as one of the city's sharpest corporate lawyers preceded him. The woman was poised, her expression unreadable, her tailored grey suit a stark contrast to Giselle's flamboyant red. She radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Lucius frowned, irritated by the interruption. "I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Security." But before anyone could move, David Chen stepped forward, placing a slim leather portfolio on the granite table. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Montclair. We are precisely where we are supposed to be." Cress stepped into the room, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble floor. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Giselle's confused sneer, before finally landing on Lucius. Lucius stared at her. Recognition dawned, slowly contorting his features into a mask of pure disbelief. This was Cressida, but it wasn't. The timid, accommodating woman he had discarded was gone. This woman was a stranger, powerful, confident, and looking at him not with heartbreak, but with an unnervingly calm detachment like a scientist observing a specimen. "Cressida," he finally stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, filling the suddenly silent room, "is Miss Bishop, and I am here to attend my first shareholders' meeting." A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Shareholder," one of the board members scoffed. "With all due respect, the shares held by employees and minor investors don't grant access to this meeting." David Chen opened his portfolio. "Ms. Bishop is not a minor investor," he stated calmly, sliding official notarized documents across the table towards the board's chairman. "She is the sole beneficiary of the Robert Bishop Blind Trust. As of 2 months ago, she has taken active control of that trust." The chairman, a portly man named George Finney, picked up the documents, his eyes widening as he read. "The Bishop Trust, but that's been dormant for decades. It's a founding stake." His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. He looked up, his face pale. "To be precise," David Chen continued, "the trust holds 52% of the voting shares of the parent company, Montclair Holdings International. My client, Ms. Cressida Bishop, is the new majority owner." The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of pure shock. You could have heard a pin drop. Giselle's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Cress, their minds scrambling to process the impossible truth. Lucius's face had drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. "That's impossible," he breathed, shaking his head. "It's a lie. My father—" "Your father knew," Cress said, her voice cutting through his denial like a shard of glass. "He knew that the foundation of this entire empire belonged to my grandfather, the man whose artistry he built his brand upon, and then conveniently forgot. You, however, seem to have been kept in the dark." She walked slowly around the table until she stood directly opposite him. "You spoke of your vision for the future," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But your vision is one of debt disposability and disrespect for the legacy that made this company great. You fired craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to this house to fund her overpriced, overhyped collections." She gave a curt nod towards a horrified Giselle. "You leveraged the company's assets to fund your own ego. You have mistaken flash for substance and buzz for value." She placed her hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. "Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder. This board is adjourned. A new meeting will be called tomorrow to elect a new board of directors. Mr. Montclair, your position as CEO and chairman is terminated. You have 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from your office. Security will escort you out." Lucius just stared at her, speechless, his empire crumbling around him in the space of 5 minutes. "You can't do this," he finally whispered, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. Cress leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, intense pitch for his ears alone. "You once told me to focus on my little hobby. You were right. I found one. It's called owning your entire world. You said a son would be good for the brand's legacy. You were wrong. A daughter is." With that, she straightened up and addressed the stunned room. "My name is Cressida Bishop, and I am the future of this company." The silence in the boardroom stretched for a full 10 seconds, a vacuum of pure shock that sucked all the air from the room. Then it fractured. Lucius Montclair, who had stood frozen as if turned to stone, finally came back to life, but as a grotesque parody of his former self. The charismatic control vanished, replaced by a raw, sputtering rage. "Fraud!" he roared, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the black granite table, a gesture that lacked its intended power and only betrayed his desperation. "This is a fabrication, a pathetic, vengeful fantasy. My lawyers will bury you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Cress didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a pillar of calm in his storm. "On the contrary, Lucius," she replied, her voice level and cold. "You are the one who has no idea. You never did. You saw a quiet wife, not a founder's heir. You saw a hobby, not a legacy. Your blindness is not my problem." Her composure seemed to enrage him further. He turned his pleading, wild eyes to the board members, the men and women who had idolized him just minutes before. "Finney, tell her this is absurd. We are Montclair Couture. George Finney." The chairman meticulously avoided Lucius's gaze. His attention suddenly glued to the documents in his hands, as if they were the most fascinating text he had ever read. The other board members followed suit, shuffling papers, checking their phones, doing anything to avoid being caught in the blast radius of their fallen leader. They were sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water. Their allegiance had already shifted their minds furiously, calculating how to best position themselves in this new regime. Seeing no help there, Lucius's fury collapsed into a pathetic, desperate plea. "Cressida, Cress, please," he whispered, the change in tone jarring. "We can talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work something out, a settlement." It was the sight of Giselle that cut him short. Her face, a mask of horror, was twisted with a fury that mirrored his own. But her anger was aimed at him, the man whose power had been her shield and her platform. With a strangled cry of disgust, she shot Cress a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, grabbed her ludicrously expensive handbag, and fled. Her stiletto heels clicked a frantic, panicked rhythm on the marble floor, the sound of an era of cheap spectacle running for its life. Her exit seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Lucius deflated the fight, draining out of him, leaving a slumped, hollowed-out man. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked his age. The two security guards who entered the room were almost a mercy, their impassive presence putting an end to the humiliating spectacle. They flanked him, their quiet professionalism, a stark contrast to his emotional disintegration. As they led him toward the door, he finally looked at Cress one last time, his eyes searching for something. Pity, regret, a flicker of the woman he once knew. He found nothing but the cool, steady gaze of a stranger who now owned his entire world. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with a profound finality. The reign of Lucius Montclair was over. The boardroom was still thick with tension. Cress allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, letting the new reality cement itself in the minds of everyone present. Then she turned to the pale-faced chairman. "Mr. Finney," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Please schedule the extraordinary meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. My office will forward you the agenda and the list of my proposed new board members. You are all welcome to tender your resignations beforehand if you feel you cannot align with the new direction of this company." It was a clear, professional dismissal. David Chen gave a slight, satisfied nod, gathering his papers. As the shaken board members filed out, avoiding her eyes, he placed a steadying hand on her arm. "You were magnificent, Ms. Bishop." Cress let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep sense of exhaustion and a startlingly clear sense of purpose. "This was just the first step, David," she said. "The real work starts now." Her first day as chairwoman of Montclair Holdings was a blur of calculated action. But she didn't begin in the executive suite. She bypassed the elevators and took the service stairs down to the workshops, the true heart of the company. When she entered, a hush fell over the room. The remaining artisans, the cutters, seamstresses, and textile experts looked up from their work, their faces etched with the anxious uncertainty of people who had grown used to the axe falling without warning. She gathered them together, standing not on a platform, but among them on the worn wooden floor. "My name is Cressida Bishop," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and sincerity. "Some of you may have known my grandfather, Robert Bishop." A few of the older workers exchanged surprised glances. An elderly tailor at the back, a man with hands gnarled from 60 years of holding a needle, let out a soft gasp. He remembered. "My grandfather believed that a garment's soul is in its fabric and its stitch." Cress continued, her gaze sweeping over their faces. "He believed in substance, in quality, in the irreplaceable value of a master's hand. This company was built on that belief, and under my leadership we are returning to it." She then announced her first executive order, the immediate reinstatement of every single craftsman Lucius had fired, with full back pay and a formal apology from the company. A wave of stunned disbelief was followed by a ripple of applause that grew into a heartfelt ovation. The old tailor, his eyes glistening with tears, stepped forward. "Robert Bishop," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the finest man I ever knew. He would be so proud of you today, miss." In that moment, Cress wasn't just a CEO. She was a promise fulfilled, a legacy restored. Over the next few weeks, the transformation of Montclair Couture was seismic. Cress's Phoenix agenda was not just about a hostile takeover. It was a complete cultural and creative resurrection. The new motto she installed, etched onto the lobby wall, where a giant portrait of Lucius used to hang, was substance over spectacle. She walked through the design studio, which felt sterile and soulless under Giselle's tenure. Tucked away in a corner, she found Helen, a veteran pattern maker in her late 60s, who was quietly packing her things, assuming she would be next to go. Cress approached her and asked to see her personal sketchbook. Hesitantly, Helen revealed pages filled with designs of breathtaking elegance and structural genius ideas Lucius and Giselle had dismissed as too classic. "Helen," Cress said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not accepting your resignation. I'm offering you the position of head designer." The woman stared at her, speechless, as Cress explained her new vision, a company led by the talent that had been its bedrock all along. The most symbolic change was the C-suite itself. Lucius's office had been a monument to his ego, all black marble chrome and oversized modern art with a desk the size of a small car. Cress had it all stripped out. The dark walls were painted a warm, inviting white. Sunlight, once blocked by imposing blinds, was allowed to flood the space. In place of the massive desk, she brought in a large communal work table covered in fabric swatches and sketchbooks, and in the sunniest corner, she placed a beautiful handcrafted bassinet. Her daughter Grace would often sleep there as Cress worked, a living, breathing symbol of the company's new life, a future that was female, nurturing, and creative at its core. One evening, months after the takeover, Cress stood at the vast window of that transformed office, holding a sleeping Grace in her arms. The city lights glittered below, no longer mocking her, but spread out before her like a kingdom of her own making. She thought of the woman she had been, the heartbroken wife, fleeing a party in a borrowed gown, the terrified mother-to-be huddled in Mrs. Peterson's attic room. She thought of the weight of her grandfather's key in her palm, the key that had unlocked not just a fortune, but the strength that had been inside her all along. The world was calling her story a tale of revenge. But as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she knew it was something more profound. Revenge was a fire that consumed itself, leaving only ash. What she had done was an act of restoration. She had saved a legacy from ruin and built a future for her child. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was the architect of her own destiny, a creator, a leader, and a mother. She had walked out of her old life broken, but in doing so had discovered the parts of herself that were truly unbreakable. Her reign, the reign of a bishop, had only just begun. And there you have it, the incredible story of Cressida Bishop, a story that proves that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest souls. She went from a broken, pregnant wife with nothing to her name to the powerful leader of a fashion empire, not through revenge, but through resilience, intelligence, and by reclaiming a legacy she never knew she had. Her journey reminds us that our true strength often lies dormant, hidden in our history and in our character, just waiting for a crisis to awaken it. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself and build something even more magnificent in its place. What did you think of Cress's ultimate power move? Was Lucius's downfall everything you hoped it would be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and poetic justice, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.